Hello, dear friends, and welcome to our weekly program that we are airing from Northern California live from the Divine Light Spiritist Group in cooperation with Beseja Spiritual Healing Center, or BSH. We are focusing on studying the Spirit's teachings in the Gospel according to Spiritism. Every chapter that Allan Kardec put together for us is summarized. No, we don't want to say summarized. Has as the second part the Spirit's teachings. Those are high-level spirits who give their commentary to the subject matter of each chapter. And so we are not studying the full chapter of what all the comments that Allan Kardec gave to us, but we're focusing on the Spirit's teachings, on the different information that the Spirits on high bring to those different chapters. And we are finding ourselves currently in chapter 5, which is Blessed are the Afflicted. Blessed are the Afflicted is the biggest chapter in the Gospel according to Spiritism. And do you wonder why? Well, we're guessing it's because we're all afflicted on planet Earth, and we all need all the help we can get to get through our challenges, our afflictions. So today we will be focusing on items 27 through 31. The first one is entitled, Should We Put an End to Our Neighbor's Trials? So these 4 different subchapters will help us understand our neighbor's suffering, our own suffering, and how do we interact? How do we help our neighbors? When do we help our neighbors in their suffering? And what does that mean for our own suffering, our own affliction? So let us begin. Hello, Tony. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining, dear friend. So the first one, item 27, is entitled, Should we put an end to our neighbor's trials? What a good question. So here we have a family member struggling. Should we put an end to it? Here we have a close friend, a son or daughter struggling deeply, severely. Do we put an end to it? That is the question that Allan Kardec had in mind. And the answer comes from Bernardin, a protector spirit, in Bordeaux, 1863. Should we put an end to our neighbor's trials if we can, or should we, out of respect for God's designs, let them take their course? Good question. We know the law of cause and effect rules the universe. As we think and feel, we emit, and as we emit, we attract. Every thought, every feeling puts down a seed in our garden of eternity. Don't we need to go through our trials? Aren't they co-created by us? So what do? Do we help our neighbors then, or do we leave them at their devices? Because it's really the effect of the seeds of the causes they gave birth to. Good question. Let's see what Bernardin is answering us. He says, some think that because one is put on the earth for expiation, all trials must take their course. Right? Sometimes we think that. By the way, we're just reminded that we have a little PowerPoint that we would like to share. Let me just see how we're going to do this. I don't know why. Here it is. Mystery solved. That's always a good one. Okay, thanks for bearing with me, dear friends. And here, boom, here it is. I hope you can see it. We're going to put it into slideshow mode. And here you can see it's items 27 to 31. And we are at item 27. So some think that because one is put on the earth for expiation, all trials must take their course. There are even those who want to believe that not only must nothing be done to mitigate the trials of others, but that on the contrary, it is necessary to contribute to them, to make them more profitable, adding to their intensity. Wow. Do we believe that too? Do we believe that all trials have to be seen to the end? We're not supposed to shorten it or aid in the suffering of those who are afflicted? Do we believe we need to actually add insult to injury to make it a really good lesson? Let us see. This is a great error. So letting others suffer, the fact that we believe that all suffering needs to be seen to the end, and to make matters worse, is a great error. Yes, your trials must take the course marked out by God. But do you know what that course is? Beautiful. Keeps us humble, dear friends. Do we ever know what God's plan is? We don't. The best thing we can do is humble ourselves and learn from the gospel, from the spirits, of how to conduct ourselves here in this particular case when we are afflicted, or when our loved ones, neighbors, even strangers that we observe are afflicted. But here we're reminded we don't know God's plan. Do you know how far they must go? Or if your merciful Father has not said to the suffering of this or that brother or sister, you shall go no farther? We don't know. Maybe it's enough suffering for one person. Maybe they've dealt with it and shifted and transformed so that the cancer doesn't need to be seen to the end. Not everyone dies of cancer. Afflictions do shift and stop, but we don't know which ones and when. That's up to God. But we're co-creators. We're not passively sitting in the couch and waiting for God's decision. No, we're very much active. But let us see how the protective spirit continues. Do you know, if God's providence has chosen you not as an instrument of punishment to intensify the suffering of the guilty, but as the balm of consolation that must heal the wounds that God's justice has opened up? So in other words, we don't know. We don't know whose suffering needs to be seen to the end. We don't know whose suffering will come to an end, or has come to an end, or will come to an end very soon. But we know that we can always be the balm of consolation. We can always be the balm of consolation. That we know. Therefore, he says, or she, when you see one of your brothers or sisters being afflicted, do not say, it is God's justice, and it must take its course. Do not say that. Instead, say to yourself, let's see what means our merciful Father has put within my reach in order to ease the suffering of my brother or sister. And here is the answer. Here is our game plan, dear friends. So easy. We're being told exactly what to do. So what are we supposed to do? We see suffering outside of us. We know it could be expiation. We have no idea what God's plan is. But we know one thing very clearly. We are invited to help. That does not mean we are invited to put an end to it. That's not in our power. That's in God's power. But we are invited, as a matter of fact, it's our duty to be charitable and to help, to support. And let us ask, what means has God given us to help this person? Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that so beautiful to know exactly what we need to do? It gives us peace, doesn't it? We're extremely grateful. Thank you so much, Protector Spirit, and thank you, Allan Kardec, for putting it together in the Gospel according to Spiritism. So let us see. Let's see if my moral consolation, my material help, or my counsels might not assist in overcoming this trial with greater strength, patience, and resignation. How can we act? What can we do so that that person can overcome the trial with more strength, more patience, and resignation? How can we be an instrument of the good? How can we be constructive in our brothers and sisters' suffering? And that includes our enemies. Doesn't matter whether we love them, whether they're distant, whether we've never met them. Let us ask, how can I support? And if we're far away, we can always pray. Let's even see if God has not placed in my hands the means of putting an end to this suffering. Maybe we can even do a lot to put an end to it. But that must not include putting an end to someone's life. But we'll get there in a minute. So we need to be very discerning about it and not become prideful, thinking that we're more powerful than God. Therefore, always mutually help one another and never regard yourselves as instruments of torment. Let us never regard ourselves as an instrument of torment. Let us never add insult to injury. Never. But let us always mutually help one another. That is the recommendation for us. Spiritists ought to believe that their entire life should be an act of love and devotion. Would there not be great pride on the part of humans in believing themselves to have the right, so to speak, to twist the knife further into the wound, adding insult to injury? No. That's not our job. That's not our job. Always regard yourselves as instruments chosen to make the suffering stop. To summarize, all of you are on the earth for expiation. So here's the summary. All of you are on the earth for expiation, but all of you, without exception, must employ all of your efforts to mitigate your neighbor's expiation according to the law of love and charity. So we have to help each other. There is no salvation without charity, Allan Kardec taught us. And we are to follow the law of love, justice, love, and charity, which is the last law in the Spirit's book. And it helps us understand that we want and need to be always in support in service of our brothers and sisters, and help them as best as we can through their trials. So I think that's pretty clear. Our invitation, it's even more as an invitation, it's our duty is clear. And we know what happens when we don't fulfill our duty, don't we? We come back next lifetime, and those unfulfilled duties will come back to us through the same players in different constellations. And then they become regenerative duties, and that usually means a challenge. Emmanuel in Thought and Life teaches us all about that. So let us move on to item 29. Is it permissible to shorten the life of a patient who is suffering with no hope of a cure? Now, this is a very timely and very important question for all of us. There are some states, Oregon is one of them, where we are allowed to choose a premature death for ourselves. And then we employ our loved ones to execute it, to shorten our suffering. As a matter of fact, even in California, it's allowed, because I know someone who's actually used that exit method. So, are we permitted to do that? Is that a good idea? Allan Kardec gives us an example. A man is dying, the victim of cruel suffering. Now let us imagine this. A man is dying, and he is the victim of cruel suffering. His state is known to be hopeless. So it looks like he's going to die. It's a terminal diagnosis. Hospice has been called. Okay? Would it be permissible to save him a few moments of anguish by hastening his end, giving him that medication that puts an end to the suffering? We may argue it's like that's only humane. This person is suffering. There is no hope. Why would we want to allow someone to suffer that badly and not do something about it? Because the protective spirit just told us we need to help and do our best to put an end to our brothers and sisters' suffering. But are we allowed to put an end to somebody's life? Let's listen to the answer. Who would give you the right to foresee God's designs? Again, this message is from St. Louis in Paris, 1860, and he's very clearly coming out the gate, reminding us to be humble. We are not here to play God. We're here to learn to align ourselves with God's will, but not to play God, to think we're so mighty that we can make those decisions. If we think this person is suffering too much, it's our empathy, and it's hard to watch, no question. But we're not God. Could he not lead certain persons, Could God not lead certain persons to the edge of the grave and then bring them back in order to make them examine themselves, lead them to other thoughts? There's a whole huge nationwide organization called the Near-Death Society. All these people there, and these are tons of people who so-called died and came back. So it's happening. It's happening quite a bit. And what would have happened to their life path, their reincarnatory plan, if somebody, a loved one, would have said, okay, this person is at the end of their life, we're going to take them out. We can't do that, dear friends. We do not have the right to kill, even if it's the desire of the patient. Patient does not have a right to kill himself either. It's a form of suicide. And we know the consequences of suicide, even if it's an indirect suicide, by us not taking care of our body. So let us continue. No matter how extreme the condition of a dying person, no one can say with certainty that his or her final hour has arrived. We don't know, dear friends. And even if we do, we don't have the right to aid in death. In what I mean by aiding in death, meaning to expedite it. Has science never been wrong in its predictions? We know science has been wrong in predictions. Science is just like the human law, always in development. Scientists are only as good as their consciousness and their wisdom, their knowledge is developed. The materialist who sees the body only and does not consider the soul cannot comprehend these things. But the spiritist who knows what happens beyond the grave knows the value of one last thought. The value of one last thought. God knows best, dear friends. Even the last thought is valuable. And who are we to decide for ourselves or others to cut that short? So mitigate final suffering as much as you can. Yes, we are invited. It's our duty to mitigate final suffering as much as we can, but guard against shortening a life. Even for only 1 minute. For that minute might save many tears in the future. Dear friends, this is really important for us to understand. To understand intellectually first, to educate ourselves, and then make it knowledge of the heart, to feel it. Part of feeling it is applying it in our lives and educating our brothers and sisters as well. We don't want to support people in creating misery down the road either. We learned a couple of weeks ago that true suffering, or to suffer well, is looking at the consequences of our decisions. Because sometimes we think the $1 million and buying a big car is just dandy. That's just the way to go. It's fun and we can show off and la-di-la. We know the whole story. We've been there many times. Maybe not in this lifetime, but in previous lifetimes. But what is the consequence of the selfish act of receiving $1 million and using it on material goods only on ourselves and not sharing with our brothers and sisters? That's going to create misery down the road. So the consequences is what we need to consider. All right. Let us continue, friends. So now we're going to item 29. It's also by the Spirit St. Louis. Spirit's teachings, right? So this is by the Spirit St. Louis in Paris, 1860. Are persons who are disillusioned with life, but who do not want to commit suicide, guilty for seeking death on the battlefield with the intention of making their death useful. So, is it okay when we're tired of our lives but we don't want to kill ourselves outright, but we're depressed, we don't see any purpose, we really don't want to be incarnated anymore? We sign up for the military and we're being sent to a war zone. And now we do that whole situation. We're creating this situation because we want to kill ourselves. But we don't want to do it like overtly, it's covertly, because we want to kind of like serve as we allow ourselves to be killed or hope for our death. Let's see. Whether persons kill themselves or have someone else do it, their purpose is always to shorten their life. And consequently, there is suicide by intent, if not in fact. So it's an indirect suicide. If we drink, we smoke, we don't sleep, we do take other drugs, we do that our whole entire life, we expiate, we die, we are indirect suicides. We know it so well from No Solar by André Louis through Chico Xavier. When André discarnates, he ends up in the umbral. He was a very reputable doctor, and he was shocked that he ended up there. And when he was finally rescued and taken to No Solar, he learned that he was labeled an indirect suicide. He said, "Not me, you must be talking about somebody else. I didn't commit suicide." And he learned, and we learned alongside him, that yes, he did, because he did not take care of himself. He was promiscuous, he drank too much, he ate too much. That's a form of suicide. So in here we're learning that whether persons kill themselves or have someone else do it, their purpose is always to shorten their life. And consequently, there is suicide by intent if not in fact. So there's many different ways of suicide, not just the way we know. When somebody kills themselves outrightly through poison or jumping or from a bridge or whatever form they pick. The thought that their death will be useful for something is delusional. The thought that their death will be useful for something is delusional. So they're signing up for the military and they think this is a justified death. It's delusional. If they have the intention to kill themselves, it is only a pretext for coloring their act and rendering it excusable in their own eyes. If they seriously wanted to serve their country, they would seek to stay alive, defending it in everything and not seeking to die. Because once dead, they can no longer serve it for anything. So it's really a selfish act. It's not coming from service. It's pretense, dear friends. True devotion consists in not fearing death. True devotion consists of not fearing death, when it might be useful in braving peril and in sacrificing their lives beforehand and without regret if that is necessary. However, premeditated intent in seeking death by exposing oneself to danger, even if to render service, annuls the merit of the act. So if we have the intention to die, we want to die, the premeditated intent in seeking death, and then we expose ourselves to danger because we don't care anymore. And even if it looks like it's in the name of service when we fight for our country in the military, it annuls the merit of the act because we can be useful in many other ways, much more so. So, wow, now we know one more item. We need to be authentic. We need to be honest. We need to understand that we are here for a purpose. And sometimes we're suffering and it hurts incredibly. And even at the end of life, when we work at the end of life care, we see how often people suffer so tremendously. May it be through illness or other reasons. We are here to help, to do our very best to put an end to the suffering, but not to ever help someone shorten the trial by a premature death. And if we think we can be reckless or signing up for the army and expedite our death in that form or shape and putting a halo around it, no, that's not going to work either, dear friends. All right, we're moving on. Let's see. We're confused here. Where are we? All right, so we're going to item 30. Another question. A certain man exposes himself to imminent danger in order to save the life of a fellow being, knowing beforehand that he himself will die. Would this be considered a suicide? What a good question. What could be an example? Somebody jumps off a very high bridge, and it's very likely that that person would be dead by impact. And now we jump after that person because we think we can save them. Or if there's a waterfall and we're on top of the waterfall and somebody is swimming towards the edge and we jump in order to try to save them. Those may be some examples. I'm sure you have better ones where we see an imminent danger of death of our brother or sister, and then we try to save their life, but we're pretty sure that this will lead to death. Would this be considered a suicide? Let's see what the answer is. It's again by our friend St. Louis. From the moment in which there is no intent to seek death, there is no suicide, but devotion and self-denial despite the certainty of dying. So if we see that moment that somebody is in a situation where they're going to die, and we know that if we try to save them, we're going to die too. If that's not coming from, yes, there is my out, I'm just going to jump, make it look good as a savior, and that's the end of it, because I'm really tired of my life and I really don't want to live. If that's the case, it is suicide. But in the moment, as he says, from the moment in which there is no intent to seek death, when we're literally, let's say we see our child on this edge. Remember, I'm sure you've all seen the Grand Canyon, not the Grand Canyon, what is the big name of this big waterfall in New York State? Niagara Falls. Maybe some of you have been there. Tremendous waterfall. And you're on the edge. Your child jumps in. And you know this is it. And you jump. You jump because you have no intent to seek death. That's coming from devotion and self-denial. But who can be so certain? Who can say that Providence has not reserved an unexpected means of salvation at the most critical moment? Maybe there's a rock or something. Could not Providence save someone who is right in front of the mouth of a cannon? On many occasions, Providence wishes to prolong the trial of resignation to the ultimate limits, when an unexpected circumstance diverts the fatal blow. So that's entirely possible. So this is a very difficult moment to decide. But one thing is whether we're jumping, whether we're helping that person or not. But he does say that if we don't have any intent to kill ourselves for suicide, then it's devotion and self-denial, even though we know we're going to die. And even because we don't know whether maybe in the last moment, God wants to save that person. That applies to us too, right, friends? So we just pray that we won't have to be in this situation, that we won't be exposed to this. This would be awful. For some reason, I've often thought about that, particularly when my kids were young. But I think at that moment, there's a certain knee-jerk reaction. You just do it. You don't even think about it anymore. And in that moment, it wouldn't be coming from suicide. It would be coming from devotion, right? And how many times do we find in the press those heroes that jump and then save a life? Yes. All right, we're moving on. Dear friends, we're moving on to item 31, which is our last one. And again, it's by St. Louis. And it's entitled, Making One's Own Suffering Profitable for Others. So how can we make our own suffering profitable for others? How does that work? Question that Allan Kardec has. And we like his questions because they help us understand the bigger picture as well. Do not those who resignedly accept their suffering by submitting to God's will with an eye on their future happiness work only for themselves? And can they render their suffering profitable for others? So is there this selfish thing, oh good, I'm suffering, that means I'm creating good situation for the future, because then I'll be happy in the future because yay, I'm suffering. And so we're kind of calculating a little bit. And then can we also render our suffering then profitable to others? Let's see what the answer is. This suffering might be materially and morally beneficial to someone else. Materially, if through labor, the privations and sacrifices they impose on themselves contribute to the material welfare of their neighbor. Morally, by the example they offer their submission to God's will. So there's the answer is twofold. One is our suffering may be materially profitable for our loved ones, our neighbors. Materially, if through labor, the privations and sacrifices we impose on ourselves contribute to the material welfare of our neighbors. What could be an example? Our neighbor has a leaking roof. And instead for the neighbor to have to call a roofer and spend $10,000, I don't know how much it is. Thank God I haven't had to replace my roof yet. But I'd say it takes $10,000. I'm going to say, dear neighbor, I'm going to fix it for you. You pay for the materials, I do the labor. Snowstorm hits, gets really cold, and I'm slaving away to put this new roof on for my neighbor so that they can save money. So materially, they profit. They get a new roof. Their house is going to be dry. That's one way. And another one is they're saving money. And that increases my suffering. So my suffering is now helping them materially to be in a better position. So materially, if through labor, the privations and sacrifices we impose on ourselves contribute to the material welfare of our neighbors, that's considered noble. Morally, by the example they offer to their submission to God's will. So if we're doing terribly and we're suffering awfully, then we can contribute to our brothers and sisters by being a role model. We're obedient and we're resigned. We are courageous and we're patient. In other words, we're practicing all the virtues. And our neighbors come by, our brothers and sisters, right? The people we know in our circle of friends, and they observe us, how we suffer, how well we suffer. And that contributes morally to our brothers and sisters. This example of the power of the Spirit's faith can encourage unfortunate people to resignation and save them from despair and its disastrous consequences for the future. So by accepting resignedly our suffering, to submit to God's will, we may be contributing to our neighbor's well-being. But we don't do it because we want to impress. We don't want to do it for selfish reasons. We want to do it because it feels good that way. And it's the right thing to do. Because we know the bigger picture. We're wearing a bifocal lens. Dear friends, we've learned a little bit about how we can suffer better. How to conduct ourselves in situations where our neighbors are suffering. We learned that it is our duty to help our brothers and sisters in their afflictions and to even do our very best to put an end to it, but we're not allowed to become co-inspirers of taking their desire to put an end to their physical life. Because why? Because we don't have the right to kill or to support death in that way. And if somebody is in a situation like in a stream that's going down the precipice, and we see it, and we jump in, we must not jump in for reasons of suicide because we're done with our lives and we see the great opportunity to put an end to it. No, that would not be the right reason. But if we do it out of devotion, out of wanting to be of service, that's a good cause. And to sign up for the army and say, so be it, hopefully I finally am allowed to discarnate because I'm going to throw myself in the most dangerous situation. I do it in the name of saving my country. That would not be coherent either. If our intent is suicidal, God knows. God knows. It's labeled an indirect suicide. So, dear friends, and by suffering well, we can help our brothers and sisters to be role models. We can contribute to them. We can teach them how to be more responsible when it comes to suffering. And let us remember to always look at the consequences of every situation in our lives. Not just the faith value, but where does it lead us? What are the consequences of it? Helps us to make better decisions. Dear friends, thank you so much for joining. There's also Linda Fly, Darnell Fly. Thank you so much, dear friend, for joining. It's a pleasure to be here to share these rich teachings that help us so much to navigate our reincarnation in a more conscious, more God-aligned, God-centered way. Always looking out for our brothers and sisters, and always wanting to be charitable, with desire to be charitable, and not just physically charitable, but also morally charitable. And what does morally charitable mean? It means that we are benevolent towards all and everything, no exceptions. No politicians, no doctors, no co-worker, nothing. Anything. We have goodwill, find something good. And then it's indulgence towards our brothers and sisters' imperfections, because we know we need indulgence too. We're very imperfect, even if we don't think we are. We are. And by giving, we receive. We give indulgence, we receive indulgence. And lastly, we're invited to be forgiving. Forgiving the trespasses of our brothers and sisters. Not only to stay healthy, but also because we need forgiveness most and foremost. We step on people's feet left and right, and most of the time we don't even know it. So we need to be forgiven. And again, by giving, we receive. Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you for Allan Kardec for the clarity that he serves us whenever we're ready. And thank you for the spirits on high for providing these roadmaps for us. And thank you for joining, dear friends. So God willing, we will be meeting again, same place, same time, next week with Chapter 6, the Spirit's teachings of Chapter 6 in the Gospel according to Spiritism. God bless you. Good night.